Hey, man.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Good.
Good. All right. So, I'll just go over some of the next few courses we have coming up. We have an advanced forcible entry with live fire, March 8th and 9th at SFA. And then we have one at our Southern Ontario location in Essex, May 3rd and 4th. Hazmat technician, March 24th to the 29th, firefighter survival and RIT, April 7th and 11th. We have pretty much monthly EMR and first aid courses, and we'll be introducing some new 1521 incident safety officer and 1041 instructor courses coming in the late spring, early summer. So keep your eye out for those.
Yeah, and this being the pre-roll for episode 100, I just want to make sure I acknowledge you and everyone at SFA, and I'm just super grateful, as the whole team is, for you guys supporting us.
Well, thanks. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. It's exciting. It's come a crazy distance. Some of the names you've had on there, it's insane.
Yeah, some great ones coming up, too.
Good. Perfect.
Okay, man, get back at it.
All right, buddy. Well, enjoy snowboarding.
Okay, catch you later.
Okay, take care.
Bye. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 100 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. In addition to thanking everyone that has come this far with us, I would like to make two requests of our loyal listeners. To help us celebrate this milestone, reach out to Brad, Matt, and Haley and drop some love in their DMs for all the love they continue to pour into this. I'm eternally grateful for their effort and friendship. And then reach out to a guest whose episode that you enjoyed and thank them for sharing their story. We are all better and more connected because of their honesty and vulnerability. Here's to the next 100, and here's the team, talking all things MCP. Hey, Matt.
What's up? What the heck is this so red for?
You just look super burnt.
The marketing guy's got the worst lighting.
Of course, eh?
The mechanic with the broken car.
This is bad. Hang on.
Yeah, we can't stare at that the whole time. There's no way.
Yeah.
We totally can. I just want to make you work for it. That's all.
Yeah, what a start, eh? Terrible.
You can't edit that out. I guess the tough thing will be that the three of you are on one track, right?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I saw this thing the other day at Long McQuaid. They have now digital audio workstations for podcasts. I guess Rode, they've cornered the market now. Like, it's pretty incredible. They have their own mic setups, their own little workstations. So the podcasting is taking off.
Lucky for us. So it came with a mic and everything? It was the Rode NT1, I imagine?
No, it's like a whole other separate one. It's not like a condenser. It's like a dynamic mic, and it's got like the setup and the proper stand and arm.
Yeah.
But the actual like digital station has like faders and everything on it. It's like $900. And I think it just hooks up to your computer, so you could probably use Logic or Pro Tools, whatever you use.
Awesome. We're here. We're making it happen.
We're doing it. I don't have a fancy mic, though.
You're okay. It's fine. Brad will work his wizard magic on all this.
Mute.
Yeah.
So where I think we should start is sort of in line with how the episodes start, how you got involved with the podcast. I think if each of you started and sort of told a bit of a story about how that came to be, I'm not sure everybody knows. Haley, I'm not sure if we talked about it in your episode or not. We might have.
I don't think so.
Right. So I think that's something people don't know about. So why don't we start there? And you guys can rock, paper, scissors, and who wants to go first?
Yeah, I vote for Matt first.
Do you know what's funny? I was just looking at this before we actually hopped on here, but I looked at my messages when we originally started, when I reached out to you, Scott, which was April 2020. You were doing the revamping of logos or something like that. I just happened to reach out to you. And Brad was at the same time. The second message I received is, hey, I'm talking to this firefighter from Orangeville and we're having a meeting. So it's just like cutting it close, the two of us. But sure, I'll start.
You already have, so keep going.
Ah, shoot. Yeah, April 2020, I reached out to you just casually after listening to a few episodes. I think it was the back-to-back double whammy of Mark Von Oppen and Aaron Fields. And I was casually listening before, but those two right off the hop were like amazing. So I was like, hey, man, just like a lot of listeners do with you, they reach out to you and be like, hey, you know, love what you're doing. But I thought I was just like, hey, I'd casually do this stuff if you ever needed someone logo-wise or video production or whatever. Always happy to help. And I think that's kind of where that all stemmed from for me, I guess. And you just are like, yeah, yeah, thanks for the feedback again, like you do with everybody. It's enjoyable to see it, people respond, and you're like, yeah, just so happens we're working with a new partner, and just to mash up the logos together as a sponsor, and lo and behold, here we are. You're stuck with me now, man.
I didn't realize, looking back, how closely you and Brad came on board. And I remember mentioning to Brad, I reached out and actually messaged you, Brad, and said, like, what episode was it you started? Because it feels like you've done all of them. It feels like you guys have always been here. But I think it was around like episode 42 or something, wasn't it? You've officially edited more episodes than I did and done 10 times the job.
I think it was around 42. I remember actually it was Jeff Cowan's. You had put out a few and they were kind of sporadic. And I remember I was quite upset with you. Actually, I was going to reach out to this guy and be like, you need to put out more. Like, this is unacceptable. Like, you have no idea what content you're putting out here. But no, I reached out to you and I was just like, hey, I really appreciate like what you're doing. Like, I'm trying to get in the fire service. And I felt like it was really helping. And it was funny because like when you reach out to people, usually you just get oh, thank you. Like, I appreciate that and kind of like go on your way. But in your classic fashion, you kind of elaborate. It was, oh, I'd love to do more, but you know, it's the audio editing and this and that. And it's funny, like you and I talk about it. I'm a big believer in the universe and that things just come together for a reason. And it was just funny because I said to you, I was like, oh, well, I do sound editing. If you want to like have a chat, and it spiraled into this. It's been a lot of fun. So from my perspective, to hear the conversation before it's all kind of put together in a nice package, because you get to kind of hear the full deal. And it's kind of unique in that sense. You get to hear the raw cut version. It's nice.
And I remember we talked about, I just sort of had my way of editing and the way I wanted to sound. And I almost didn't want to put that on anybody else, like how much editing there was. I know you're way faster than I am, but, you know, cutting out all the double speak and the ands and the ums and maliciously editing myself out. If I don't need to be saying anything, I would cut myself out. I remember having that conversation with you and you're like, no, I get it. And you did. You got it right away and you nailed that one episode. And it was like, this is too good to be true.
I mean, the first few was learning what you kind of want. So I'd send it to you and you say, like maybe change this, and that. And it's kind of grown to a thing now. It's nice where it's just like, that was great. Perfect. I've kind of gotten a good flow with it now. And yeah, I think it works great. It's been fun.
We have a lot of side conversations on how we do put a lot of effort into how it sounds for the listener, right? We want it to sound a certain way. And we've talked about the frustration around just other podcasts in general. And some don't put the time in to edit it and make it sound the best it can. So sometimes the content gets lost. So how much the sound of it matters.
The way you kind of described it was you're kind of putting together someone's story, and it's almost like an audiobook in a way. That's not so much a podcast where it is, hey, this is their story. You kind of want it polished. You want it so that people can listen back on it. And I like the raw and the uncut and stuff like that, but like you listen to a nice podcast that's well crafted and you can hear that they put a lot of effort into it, and it makes a difference. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, Haley, what about you? Do you remember how it all
Yeah,
began?
I do. I remember listening to a couple of your podcasts at first, and I just reached out like Matt and Brad, and I remember just saying how much I appreciated it because I was new to getting into firefighting. So our relationship kind of developed from there, where it became like a, hey, thanks for putting out this information. Like, I've been listening to it for a while. Kind of turned to a mentorship because I knew I was getting into full time, and you helped me a lot with the process and connections as well too. And once I got hired on, once my offer was 100%, I remember you were one of the first people I called. I reached my goal, but how can I help out you guys? And how can I join in on the message too? So I was really excited about that. And then I remember you asking me to go on and talk about my story. It was very weird being on a podcast, but I look back now and all the things that it's kind of given me, where I met so many great friends from it. Also connection wise, just networking and being able to have a good connection with you guys as well too. And it's been a real blessing, and I have a lot of people who reach out to me for mentorship now and just guidance. It's been great to kind of be part of the team and be able to connect with others who love firefighting as much as we do.
It's funny how every guest has a little bit of, no matter who they are, has a little bit of nerves. Some guys have done more than others. They maybe got the nerves out with previous podcasts, but they've got nerves coming on talking about it. So, you know, there's conversations about how to alleviate that. But I always let them know, like, I have to do every single one. You know that, right? Like, you got to do it once. Yeah. I have to do them all. So I just try to put the level of nerves in realistic terms perspective for them.
Yeah.
It's the funny way to sort of relax them a bit. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And it's been really nice to be able to connect with others and people reach out. It's really nice to hear other stories too, and how people can relate to what I've been through, and also helping other people into firefighting. So it's really been a blessing to connect with other people too.
So I'll put it to all of you. What about the podcast or the message? What do you find is the main arc that you carry with you that draws you to it, that makes you want to keep moving forward with it?
Before we jump into that, with the 100 episodes, why don't you share your story? We don't want to skip you. And I know a lot of listeners have probably heard it with episode 50, but just to refresh, what prompted you to start the podcast?
Yeah, the recap would be, I had a 7-minute commute to work when I lived in Brampton. So I wasn't really aware of the podcast world. I guess, driving elsewhere, I could have come into that world, but it just wasn't on my radar at that time. And it was a recruit in one of the classes I was teaching that said something about, hey, you should write a book or do a podcast. I'd listened to it. I appreciated the comment and took it to heart. Like one of my rules, like, you got to take compliments as well as you take criticism. So I did. I took it to heart. It meant a lot to me. And I appreciated the fact that the way I was teaching and behaving with them and bringing things across to them resonated. So, I realized that that's where that came from. But I sort of put it in the back of my mind. But when I moved farther away and I started listening to the podcast, and this ties into Brad with the whole how they sound, I started listening to the Waking Up podcast. Is that Sam Harris? It's been so long since I've listened to his now, since he started charging for episodes. And then Jordan Peterson, I sort of got into him at that time too. So how articulate both of those guys were and how clean the episodes were, how great they sounded. They were a great listening experience. And then I started diving into like, well, hey, are there firefighting podcasts out there? And I found there were a couple. Behind the Shield was going on at that time, and then Refined by Fire. And I remember reaching out to both of those guys, sort of cold messaging them, DMing them, or however, and they sort of put things in perspective of how to do it. But my initial thought was, well, I'm late to the party. These guys are already doing it. Too bad, so sad. It would have been a great idea, but someone's beat me to it. So why bother? That's the negative talk. That shouldn't have been my first reaction, but it was. But then the more I listened, the more I realized, like, well, I think I can fit in here somewhere. I don't need to do it exactly like other people do it. Another voice at the table, one of the voices at the table. It just so happened that high school friends live up in this area, and the one brother has a studio in his basement. So the universe was kind of giving me everything I needed. Like, hey, no excuses. You've got this studio available to you. He was kind enough to let me use it and sort of give me a bit of a short tutorial on how to record what I needed to record. And then I figured, well, hey, why not just start with a couple friends, firefighters, colleagues that I'm comfortable with. I know them well, and then sit down and record their stories and see how it goes. Had some problems with the technology. I remember recording a couple episodes and lost the entire thing and had to go back and ask them, hey, by the way, can we do that entire podcast all over again? And one of the worst ones was with Aaron Fields, because the first hour that we ever recorded for that 3 hours podcast was, I had goosebumps the whole time. Like, this isn't real. This is just so good. I didn't realize to an hour in that it had stopped recording. So I had lost that entire first hour. So it finished off the whole thing. And then I had to ask him, like, hey, do you mind? As valuable as your time is, do you mind if we just do that first hour over again? And of course, Aaron being Aaron, he was so kind-hearted and just, liberal with his time. And he said, absolutely. I think we sat down and did another 2 hours plus, right? And then it got edited down. The one with my dad, that one got lost. The second episode with Peter Reed with Zeus, that was supposed to be episode 1. That got screwed up too and didn't record. No shade on Jordan whatsoever. It was an amazing first episode, but that's how the order ended up being Jordan and Zeus, just to give some backstory that it's supposed to be him first, and then his got sort of lost in the shuffle and we had to redo it and reschedule. So that's why they ended up coming out 1-2 the way they did. But yeah, that's just sort of how it went. And then I was, like Brad was talking about, there was just a lot of editing. Brad, I don't know if we've ever talked about how long it actually takes you, because I remember it took me, this will highlight how terrible I was. It took me like an hour to edit 15 minutes, I believe. No, I think it took me 2 hours.
Yeah, I think you had said 2 hours.
Yeah, 2 hours, because Aaron's podcast took me 24 hours of editing. I would never want to hate doing it. So I would sit down and I'm editing. And as soon as I'm like, I'm not enjoying this, I would just stop editing. And then I would go back to it when I'm fired up about it again. So I always wanted to make sure it was like an enjoyable experience for me. So I knew it could have some longevity and I wanted to keep doing it. So that's why the editing took so long. And that's why it's such a massive blessing that all three of you came along, but for Brad, for the editing part of it. Again, it opened up for us to record more and release 2 a month, or maybe even 3 sometimes. And like I said, it seems like this is always the way it's been. It's weird to talk about it looking back, like I was doing it by myself. Having done so many with you guys, it just seems like this is the way it was always supposed to be.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. Yeah, what are we at now?
Well, I think we're technically at 103.
Since I've come on, that's 60. Matt, you would have been before that.
Not much before. Just to, I guess, clarify, because you guys had such killer intros, I kind of just like stumbled through classic Matt. A little bit of background is the marketing side of things is behind the curtain, but all I've been helping you guys with pretty much is making things look pretty for the most part. But no, I jumped on and did some logo design and doing all the promos and stuff. I don't remember which one it was, but we've had a bunch of changes like visually over the years too, to what it is now, kind of perfecting the craft as we go. And I think it's a pretty good setup and a good team dynamic. Like you say, Scott, who would have figured you were doing this for basically 2 years before, and also now you're at a good, solid, quality team of 4 people, which is pretty impressive. And you're at, this episode is 100, but more than that. That's pretty impressive, team.
You've been very gracious in taking my thoughts and then tweaking them and guiding me a little bit here and there and making it the way it should be. And I've learned a lot about that end of things from watching you. You're great with navigating people through their ideas and being supportive of it, but also constructive criticism and getting it where it needs to be. I think it's always been very smooth between all of us.
Very similar to running a business. Sometimes people don't often see that. I know you had a vision from the get-go, right? And it's pretty clear when you talk about it. And it's just a matter of pulling that out of somebody and keeping them to it and bringing other people on board and trying to ensure that the same vision sticks. Ultimately, that your listeners feel that too.
Mm-hmm. Haley, you've been great with the relationship with clients and how people perceive things and what they need and seeing it from their perspective. And when we've discussed about what might be best for people as listeners.
It's really important to know, really think about what they're looking for when we're providing a service. Essentially, we are, right? We're trying to get more listeners and make a good social media page. And Matt's been really good for that too, especially when we talk about videos or anything creation-wise. I know that you've always just kind of given him a rough idea of what we're kind of looking for. And he's always delivered on the videos and the creation with that kind of stuff too, which seemed to be doing really well on our Instagram. Like a lot of people like the visual stuff.
Yeah, so getting back to that question then, what has it been about the arc of the podcast overall or the message that's sort of always resonated with you? And maybe it's different for everybody, so I've just always been interested to pick your brain on it.
From my perspective, I think it's just the human element of it. You listen to so many other podcasts and it's about a subject, it's about tactics. This is more about the person. They say like, oh, I played lacrosse. I played lacrosse. Oh, I played hockey. I played hockey too. And it's like you can relate to these people, and their stories and as it goes through and it builds, and then all of a sudden they start talking about their career and it becomes inspiring in a way. So I think just the human element of it is the most interesting part.
I've actually had people say, how come you guys don't talk about tactics? Well, when you listen to the progression of 100 episodes, it's the human side of it. It's cool when I can listen to something, and I was never a big podcaster by any means until I found Multiple Calls. I was big on music and stuff, and I found this, and I remember listening to and we keep talking about Aaron Fields. That episode, there was barely any firefighting talk. I learned more from that about life in general, stuff that I resonated with that I never thought I ever would. And I'm just like, this is free. And like hearing stories, and at the time, so 2020, I was still am, volunteer firefighter, still very junior. And when people talk tactics, I had no idea, right? People are talking like fog nozzles and smooth bores and stuff. I'm like, I'm just here. I'm just happy to be here. Then you hear stories of people and you're like, it prepares you for like what you're getting into. I remember the one story with Annette Zapp where she was sharing about her personal story about like waking up in the middle of the night and having that fire like with her neighbor and stuff, and hearing like, it's perspectives, man. When you hear people's perspective and how things change and their experiences, and it prepares me. I learn from this stuff, even though we're not talking tactics, that's next level. But it's just like, how do I prepare for not only firefighting, but life as a human? I think that's the coolest thing for me is just the stories, being able to resonate with people. Like my background is not firefighting by any means. I wasn't a very sporty dude. I worked in an office up until becoming a full-time firefighter and running my own business. So I don't have that crazy background like most people have. So when I hear people like me, where they're like, I sold cell phones at the mall or something like that, I'm like, that's cool. That's so cool. Because we're not all the same. We're not all like track star athletes. But that's the exciting part about it is you get a flavor of these really killer people, really rock solid fathers, mothers, athletes, you name it. And you can resonate with little bits and pieces of each person.
Once you know more about them, then when they talk about what they think, you understand it even more.
I think the depth is critically important because where I'm learning about like how to be a solid father from people's perspectives and like, oh, I became a firefighter because this happened and this is my purpose for my life and I want to do this. I'm like, oh, okay, well, cool. How do I do that?
Brad, you mentioned Corley. He literally just called me out of the blue today. And just him being such a great human being, like he was just wanted to let us know that you guys are great and what you're doing is awesome, and been diving into the episodes more and complimented us in general and the interview style. And we talked about how there's just plenty of room in the pool, right? How we're all kind of filling a niche. And it's like the firefighting podcast in general, kind of like a team in and of itself, where we're all kind of filling different approaches to the job. You know, like Grabs is like super specific. It's one of the most powerful, important podcasts. I tell everybody to listen to it. It's had such an impact on the fire service overall. And I know when I go to that podcast, that's what I'm after.
it's good to break it up. And just to go back on that Corley thing, here's a guy who has a podcast, and it's by far like my favorite podcast when it comes to tactics. I mean, the guests he has on are incredible. It's always a great listen. And then he comes on your podcast and you hear the human side of him and you hear his story. And it's like, wow. So like that's kind of a unique perspective, like going back to like the human element of this podcast is to see people like that, and having guys like Bobby Eckert on too, a very tactic driven guy. And you mentioned grabs. Like, it's not to say that there's no tactics or there's no stories on this podcast. Because look at like Phil Resendez, like when he came on, he talked about his stories and so it's, the podcast has every element in it. It's just the human element of knowing where people are coming from, how they're thinking, and especially where I'm sure right now in the fire service or any emergency service, the mental health aspect of it, it's just opening up. And I think people are seeing that, and it's just opening up a whole other world. So to hear the human side of it, instead of just saying, we pulled 65, we did this, and well, it's like, no, like this call kind of did this to me, and this is kind of how I dealt with it. And it's like, oh, interesting.
What about you, Haley? What stands out for you?
Yeah, I would say as well the human aspect of it, and people like being vulnerable and talking about their story. Like, I know we talked about the mental health stuff, obviously great that people are sharing their experiences in the job as well too, but also outside of the job. How is it being a parent and a firefighter? How is it managing with your sleep, nutrition, the fitness? I did this to make sure I got enough sleep, or I changed my nutrition this way. And I kind of got like a lot of tips and tricks from other people, kind of how being a new firefighter, trying to get used to shift work, trying to figure out how am I going to work out after not sleeping all night, or am I going to nap? So it's been nice to kind of hear other people have struggled with that kind of stuff too, and trying to find a good routine with being a new firefighter and knowing what your expectations are too, and being able to talk openly with other people, and people come to me to talk about their mental health stuff too, which is always good. Especially beyond the podcast, I've had a lot of people reach out who've been able to relate to my story, which is really nice, and being able to guide them through their journey. People reached out, not being able to put on weight, trying to put on muscle. How do you pass testing? Or just asking my experience and how I got through those challenges. Just a wide range of people and their stories to kind of touch on in every element in firefighting.
Has it been weird for you guys? I think you've mentioned people mentioning the podcast to you, or you hearing it mentioned in firefighting circles, and it's like, oh yeah, we tend to get insulated. I guess you're just doing your thing and putting this out, and you tend to forget sometimes. You're building it for the audience and you have them in mind, but to actually encounter the audience is weird.
I find two different ways. The funny way, again, being a relatively brand new career firefighter, is that when you come into the service, people do their due diligence on you. So I've had people come up to me like, so how's the podcast going? I'm like, we've literally never met, but that's awesome. Like, I'm so glad you listened to it. Like, my background could be way worse for story-wise, but we have the Multiple Calls podcast backing us up. So that's a good thing.
It's a good icebreaker.
On the positive side, which has been really good, is to have really good conversations with people. And this isn't fire specific. You have some pretty wild, good life conversations with people when it comes up. People I never expected would ever listen to a firefighting podcast. It's been really positive when people come up and they're like, hey man, I remember you guys were talking about this. The last guest said this. What do you think about that? And it's just like, oh man, I've never personally experienced that, what they're going through, but like, yeah, tell me what you learn. And we go back and forth with us four too about personal stuff that we're dealing with. We know quite a bit about each other, and that's the way it should be though, the real life stuff. And it's great to have these conversations with people, and it should happen more often, really.
Yeah, it's been great beyond doing this, that this brought us together and we gained friendships. To be friends with you guys is like the greatest gift. So the fact that that even came out of this is just phenomenal. Could just be a business together, like that being the intent, to try and, crack into that business and make it a thing. And that's never been the driving force. We've just been who we are, and we have this desire to do something that aligns with each of us. And we've just done it organically that way. And it just is what it is. Not to say that we're not excited, because we are. We do get excited as it grows and people reaching out and realizing that people do listen. That's amazing. That is what you want. But to do something that resonates from your heart, and then you hope that it resonates with people.
How have you found it, Scotty? Like, how do you find, since you started doing the podcast, how do you find the response?
We've had conversations over the comment section, and you'll see sort of infighting in the usual social media, like especially firefighting keyboard warriors doing their thing on just general reels that I would have shared, right, reposted. But on stuff that we've put out, right, or our episodes, like our content, there's really never been any negative pushback. Like, maybe people are going to make an effort now, but there's really never been any negative
Just
pushback.
opened a can of worms.
I did, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, what is it? Any PR is good PR, right? Yeah, so anybody that's ever reached out, it's been very, very positive and appreciative. And I remember Tasarski saying to me, just remember that there's a lot of people out there that love it that don't reach out. So not everyone feels the desire to do that, right? Or they just don't do that. They're more of a private person, or they think, well, they probably won't get the message. Like you said, it probably happens a lot where a lot of people listen and they love it and they would tell you, but they don't message.
It's pretty amazing to see. Don't quote me on what the statistic is, but it's like a review thing for businesses. Let's say 1 in 10, they have one bad experience. They're going to jump all over it and, hop on the keyboard and be like, these guys are stupid. They don't know they're not firefighters. But for the other 9 people, like you say, they'll probably never say anything, even though you blew their minds. You probably have a huge list of people who actually do reach out. That's huge. That means that we're reaching people on a different level, which I'm super grateful to be part of that you're reaching people so much so that they're reaching out to you personally and telling you, hey, Scott, man, like calling you for that matter. That's even better. That's amazing. A personal conversation to be like, hey, Scott, great job. You and your team are doing awesome. I think that's really cool to be part of that.
I always think it's interesting when you send us the stories that people will message you, or when people message me or you guys too. And it's just like, I listened to this podcast, I could really relate to it. And those are like the things that really make me happy. Or they reach out, say, I listened to your podcast. I've been trying to get hired on for 5 years and I finally got hired. And like that stuff makes us really excited too.
The friendships in general, like I've loved the fact that it's helped me focus on being a part of the fire service in general. You need to get outside the 4 walls of your department and expand your mind. And that'll open you up more than anything you'll ever do is you go to a conference or talk to other guys from other departments. So to feel like you're a part of something bigger than just your fire department, like you've joined this service. And then now to gain brothers and sisters, like literally good, deep friendships with people now that I've never physically met them. I've never shaken their hand or given them a hug. There's people that have just become very connected with me and with us through this. So I've mentioned before about how the job's given me more than it's ever taken away. And I think other than my time and our time, you could say that everything you do takes your time, but this has done nothing but give over and over and over again to me. So I really appreciate that part of it.
I think that's a really cool thing too, because we've talked about this collectively in terms of like the direction where we kind of wrestled a little bit with subscriptions or payments or something like that. Whereas the cool thing about the fire service is that it's geared towards giving back. There is times where it does merit some financial reimbursement. I'm not crapping on it by any means. It's a great thing. But the amount of time that you guys, more specifically Brad and you, Scott, as well, but like the amount of time that you guys have given up, like it can be a full-time job. And the fact that you guys especially are of the giving spirit, that it's just part of who you are and that you're not doing this for compensation, that's like super impressive. It's pretty rare. It'd be a pretty cool career if we were doing this podcast for a living. At this point where we are, podcasts are free, right? That's just common. We toyed with doing like a subscription base for like exclusive content, which kind of presents a bit of a challenge for all of us. If this becomes a business, then you're going to have to treat it like a business and put the time in like it's a business. And just to put it in perspective, we say, okay, you guys should have video content or like podcasts with these heavy hitters and go see them and learn from them and talk tactics with them. And that'd be awesome. But Scott, do you mind flying us out to like LA for a conference there so we could talk to people and really hammer this out? But I think we're doing the best we can with the resources we have. And I think we've done a pretty dang good job.
I remember even Jordan Paris was talking because he was a big podcast guy, and validly he said, number one thing, he's like, you got to make sure you come out every week at the same time because like they need to know every week it's going to come out or they'll stop listening. And then I realized like I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't physically do it. So I had no choice but to do it the way I was doing it and just hope, that wasn't the case. And then I started to realize, but wait a minute, I don't necessarily consume the podcast I listen to that way. Like I'm waiting for these other ones to drop an episode. And if it's 3 months in between, I don't care. I just love it so much. I just can't wait to listen to it. So I just had to realize that I can only do what I can. We can only do what we can do and just put it out. If we want to do it a certain way, this is the way it's got to be done. And it's just going to have to drop when it drops. We don't have a specific scheduled time every week. It's not necessarily like a radio show or a TV show where you're flipping through the TV guide and have to be in the same place every time at 7 p.m. to make sure you're going to watch Magnum PI. It's not quite like that anymore. We just consume it whenever we want. And I kind of like when they're spaced out. I'm not saying I want to have all these podcasts come out every single day because I wouldn't be able to keep up with them. So if I have 5 or 6 I listen to and they're spaced out properly, then I'm always up to date with all of them because I can fit them in with my day. So it's kind of nice when they're not piling up on you or there's so many and you can't keep up with them.
You did mention Corley with the weekly scrap. Weekly. God bless that guy.
And live.
A ton of work.
And now he's broadcasting across all platforms. That is no joke. We can't shout him out enough about how great him and his team are.
There comes a point where you have to be compensated somehow for your time. That dude Absolutely, 100%. And the content that's produced and how we all come back to it, because this is great, 1000%.
I've learned so much and recommended so many episodes to so many people. So they definitely deserve everything that they've earned.
I think it's good to just recognize how much it's kind of changed and grown already, though. Like when Matt says we've remarketed and changed the logo and stuff, we started at one and now we're doing more podcasts a month. It's what you can kind of do within our threshold and our capacity, right? In a year or something, maybe we'll be putting out more. We're all kind of seeing where life takes us.
Brad, what's your take on that?
I think that the space is good. There's a lot of podcasts I listen to, and every week, like they're always coming out. The space is kind of nice. It's hard because I'm the one that controls the space right now, so it's interesting. But I like it a little bit more time because it allows you to digest that episode. And there's so much going on also. I know, for instance, like Joe Rogan, it feels like that guy comes out with a podcast every day. And it's tough to keep up with what's going on. And they're 3 hour long or 4 hour long. I'm much like you too, Scott, where like I like to pick things apart. When I listen to these episodes back, I want to make sure that they're clear. And 10 years down the road, it's going to still sound as good. But like you said too, you'll still listen back and be like, oh, I could have changed that. I wish I had more time that I could bang them out more too. But then I think people might grow tired of it. It's hard to say, but everyone just wants to consume so much all the time. You never know. Maybe they just want more and more and more.
But it seems to me that it's been sustainable. Brad may say different, but it seems like so far it's been sustainable, that we don't feel pressured and forced. And I hope you guys never have felt forced or pressured about anything that's ever happened with this. I hope it's always just felt organic and an enjoyable part of your existence and not just this thing you have to do.
Don't believe him. He's the worst boss ever. Nothing but pressure. This guy.
I thought this was a roast. You guys convinced me otherwise. Glad it's not an intervention. That is for me. What's the next 5 years look like for multiple calls? Maybe 5 years is too long.
What's the next 5 minutes look like for multiple calls? Yeah. Sometimes I have a hard time looking further down the road. It not being something that has to be done, and it just being when it can be done. It's always been this steady, consistent, enjoyable thing that's been giving back to me over and over. So as much as things growing is nice, if this was the pace we were just on and we were just organically growing the way we have, the total number of plays since 2018, it's this steady linear arc up. And we've had these discussions, like, do you push harder? Like, in what areas? And it's a valid question. Every time you ask it, I'm like, it's a really valid question. But it's almost like that, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Even though we've been made tweaks along the way when we see fit and when we feel it, not having this urgent drive to force it and make it bigger and faster. If it just stayed at this pace and we just did what we did and it just grew and people enjoyed it, I think I'm good. Everything's icing. This is all just icing. It's just been great. But maybe that's not very entrepreneurial of me. Maybe I should be more. It's a balance. I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance for sure. Like you say, the entrepreneurial mindset, that's something I wrestle with. I'm not like a big entrepreneur guy because I've been with some big entrepreneur people and they're different personalities. They're driven. Yeah, 5 years out, we're going to be triple this and we're going to be in this space. I'm happy with a linear progression. That's awesome. We're doing it. Things are getting done. We have kind of dabbled in the video side of things with YouTube and trying that out. And you got the Instagram thing going too. So it's not just podcasts, right? Like 50,000 plus followers at this point is pretty impressive. We're reaching people and they're not bots because I know you probably clear them out. I think that's probably reassuring for some people to hear is that it's not going to change drastically because it's working.
It's been a slow burn, but you get messages from people. That just doesn't necessarily happen all the time. You really help put that in perspective from the social media aspect.
It's community work. The reason why you don't have a whole lot of negative comments is because you built a community who start to self-police for you. I've seen it and you've seen it too. You've built a community.
If you manage the comments, as much as Rogan is probably right about, like, just don't read the comments, man. Just like post and ghost. But I've had some discussions in the comments with some people and you handle them very well. Not handle the person, but handle the conversation very civilly. And you see the community itself start to take that on. Like, this is the vibe here. And that was really cool for you to point that out to me as well. Haley, how have you found it with navigating all of that? What content to put out and how you've managed comments and feedback? Like, how has it been for you and what you do? Because you do run your own page. You have a personal, you also have a business page.
It's always been pretty interesting to kind of get feedback on everything and people reaching out. It's interesting to kind of see what sticks and what people are kind of looking for. I know I always ask what people want to see more of, and some things just stick and some things are interesting to people and some videos don't do as well. For our growth with the page, it's just been being who we are as people, not pushing. And I just want to share the message of just being fit in our career and enjoying the job and having good mentors. But it is hard to put yourself out there. When I spoke about myself on the podcast, I found it kind of weird telling my story. And I do still kind of find it weird posting on social media. I like to keep my life a little private, but it's great to have people who actually want to know my story and they can relate to everything. And in some way, I'm able to help some people. So trying to put myself out there a bit more. Obviously, it's different being on a podcast, and Brad and Matt probably get people all the time reaching out to. But now I see it in a different light where I'm helping more people, and we're helping people out there to get into firefighting, but also be comfortable sharing their stories.
Can you comment, Scott, on like the demographics? Because you probably see a lot of that stuff. What's the ages and how far do we reach?
They're kind of hard to track. The website gives us certain metrics, and then you also have certain metrics on social media. So on the social media end of things, it's what you would expect. It's maybe 18 to like 60-ish. While you're in your working life, I guess that's where your interest really is, either trying to get on and then maybe just recently retired. The majority is American, but there is a high percentage of Canadians. Canada, the States, and Australia actually would be number 3. It is cool to get messages from people from different countries, from Poland and from the UK and then Chile. That's really cool when people reach out from across the world. Like some guy's driving down the road in Puerto Rico and he's listening to this as one of the things he chooses from the million things he could choose or she could choose from. So that's really cool to have those moments. And it's still 85 to 90% men. That's probably been the most surprising to me. I guess I expected it to be a bit more balanced. I mean, even though the industry as a whole is still majority male, we haven't really been trying to appease to a certain demographic. I think because we're doing human stories, like the general human condition, we're not putting out bro material. It just is what it is. Like you just put as many stories as you can. And even if you're not in the service, you find it enjoyable to listen to. Is there anything for any of you guys that have been the most surprising? What's really stood out from this experience as a whole? Either interactions with people or something that you've heard from a guest?
Yeah, I think it's surprising to hear how much pushback a lot of these people get within their departments. Hearing different stories, like even on Adam Mayer's episode, talking about the props getting destroyed or just the comments from people. And it's surprising that there's that many people that are doing this profession and don't care about it at the same time. It's interesting to hear that that's across all of North America. That's not just close by. That's like a big problem across the whole. That's been probably the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah, I remember getting disenchanted and disillusioned when I first got on. I thought everyone was going to be a certain way. Dad really never overexposed me to everybody. You know, he just kept it separate. He didn't really talk about it a lot. I didn't really know behind the curtain stuff. And I guess I never really asked. It was just what Dad did. So yeah, I got disillusioned, disenchanted early on. Like, oh my God, like, why are you here? You don't even like people. It was kind of depressing. And then you find the people in Haley, you've talked about it too, you find the people that you align with that think like you think, or even think the way you want to think. You realize you're not where you could be, and then you see them as where you want to go, and then just focus on them and go in that direction. And that sort of settled me into the reality of what the job is, and then you could really love it. And I love seeing the messages out there now that, you know, that whole saying, it's okay to love the job. It really is. It's a blessing if you're in this life and you enjoy your job. How much of a blessing is that? How many people don't enjoy their jobs, right? So why is it bad for us to enjoy our jobs? Isn't that kind of the goal? If you have to work and you had to choose something, why wouldn't you choose something that you enjoy?
Yeah, I remember reaching out to you about it, and you told me just to find my people and keep going to things and keep reaching out to other people to learn from and find your mentors and find people who are willing to teach you. And so I've cultivated people who are really into it and who are really passionate about it, and that kind of encourage me, and who are going out and doing fitness and taking care of their mental wellness. Even if they're at other departments or across the world, you can have those conversations on the phone, or you can meet up and go for coffee and go for walks and just be able to talk shop and be really passionate and be excited about it and not be shut down for wanting to go to conferences and put more time into your career just outside of being at work.
What about you, Matt? What's on your mind when it comes to things that might have surprised you?
I don't know if I'd use the word surprise as more as within the podcast and being a relatively junior firefighter on the volunteer side for about a year and a half or something. The goal for me was to become a career firefighter at some point, and it took some time. But hearing the stories of these people who are career firefighters, volunteer, wildland, hearing those stories from guests on the episodes, and then actually seeing it in practice and be like, dang, this really does happen. But there are people who are like in this job and not happy with it. Not necessarily shocking, but for my personality, I'm like, this ever happens to me, and I'm super grateful it did. I want to be like this. So I had some really good examples of guests you've had where they've shared their experiences. I'm like, I want to be like that guy. I want to be like Haley. the level of fitness that someone like Haley's at. And we've actually personally worked together. Figure that one out. There is negativity around it. I'm like, this job sounds like, from where I came from, man, this is awesome. So I guess it's just how you choose to respond. And you're going to have people who love it and people who hate it. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, and I guess it's just the realization that, every industry is like this. Every single industry, it's just people from the same pool. But we have, I guess, always held this up. And I guess that's the one thing that we're all hoping doesn't change, that this job actually is held up as something special, not as in the people in it ever see themselves as special, but the job itself stands for something that's special. I think we all need something grander and bigger than ourselves to be a part of and to strive for. So to see it brought down, it cuts a little deeper.
I would say one of the cool things that has been revealed is people like this group and people listening to who are truly into the job, who actually take time. It's cool to see 1,000 plays like right off the hop. Like that's 1,000 people who are taking the time to listen to a firefighting podcast. That's like real life stuff. That's pretty impressive. So it's cool that the caliber of person that's kind of been revealed, the people who are truly into the job, that was actually shocking to me, is to see, well, there's actually quite a few. And a lot of them are quiet. People who are like quiet warriors. It's really cool to see.
The silent professional, I think, is the way I've heard it put.
That's the word. Man, it's a good thing you got the gift for words and we don't.
I just say a lot of them. Eventually, some of them stick. That's the key. Just talk a lot and throw it all out there, and eventually something will stick. That's our interview prep, right, Haley? That's all we say. Just talk a lot and it'll stick. Volume. Just verbal diarrhea.
Synergies. Circle back.
Brad, is there anything on the job, doing the job, that you've heard from guests, and then you guys can jump off this too, that you've changed the way you see the job and how you do the job?
When I first started listening to this podcast, the one that really stuck out to me was episode 3 with Jeff Clayton. It's probably my favorite episode. It's a prime example of someone that's very into the job, very driven, and very much like, don't care about what people say, just keep moving forward. And he talks about that. And for me, it's kind of unique where he's a DC in the county where I am. So I've had the opportunity to run into him on calls, and we did some training earlier this year, and he would come by on weekends. So I got to pick his brain a lot. And it's interesting to have that. And obviously speaking with you too, where it's like, hey, I have these two brains here that are big inspirations. Take what they're kind of saying and form it into my own, and how I want to approach things and how you want to approach the job altogether, right? I think the way the podcast, if this is kind of where the question was going, the way the podcast is kind of driven how I look at things in the fire service or just life in general, it's how it's kind of come full circle, if that makes sense. Taking little tidbits here and there. Tidbits, I don't know if for the American listeners.
That's a very Canadian Freudian slip there.
Yeah, like a worst case Ontario, right? Yeah.
We don't have tidbits, we have timbits.
Yeah, they're timbits up here. I've taken a lot from this podcast and the guests. I look at how they talk about how serious they take things. And there's a lot of people in the department that I'm at that take it very serious. And obviously I see them as mentors. We have a very good, strong department with lots of good people involved. So it's been a very positive experience overall. Like I have to say, I think it's just hearing other people's stories about it and realizing, is it really that bad out there? And it's like Jeff Clayton says, just keep moving forward. And maybe you'll have an influence on other people around you as well.
Just within your own department, your own crews, we can be very hyper-focused on the things that are wrong, the things that aren't going well, the things that need to be improved. We do need to take time sometimes to think about the fire service probably is in the best place it's ever been. I'll probably get shot down for that. But like you said, Matt, so many people talking about it and driving that forward. Has there ever been this much positive momentum? Maybe we are focused too much on some of the negatives that are happening. And again, maybe that's not everyone's experience. And I know places are having hiring issues and with volume or even not getting the same caliber of people. But man, I've seen high caliber people still rolling into the service. So, maybe we do need to have a more positive outlook on where things are going.
Coming at this from like a fairly junior firefighter at the time, starting with the podcast and learning as I go, as a junior person, as a volunteer 5-6 years ago, almost now, you're very much focused on the academy. Like these are the skills you learn. This is what you have to do. This is what firefighting is. This is what the IFSTA textbook says. Get out there and do it. Don't screw it up. I found I was very focused on hitting the check boxes. Whereas now what I love to see, and I actually picked it up from you, I'm going to pump your tires here, Scotty, is the human side. So when we talk about that split of firefighting doesn't always have to be, I'm an extreme warrior firefighter. I'm going to go barrel into the house and put the fire out and go high five everyone and go to the next one. But you also don't have to be the person laying on the floor crying with the patient as well. There's a nice even split. Sometimes we have to put on our big boy and big girl pants and get in there and get stuff done. And sometimes it's, you know what? We got to be a little bit of compassion here. I've seen personally, again, this totally revealed to me. We're going to plug your Connected Warrior course here, Scott. being on the marketing side, I was privy to being part of that and seeing how that's all done and stuff. And it's just eye-opening for me to see that there's a human side. I remember a call going to car versus motorcycle. Motorcycle did not win. And seeing the person at the side of the road who actually didn't cause it, it's just the other person was going way too fast. But just seeing the blank human stare of, you know exactly what they're thinking about, and you know that's going to haunt them for the rest of their lives. You can see it in their face. That's the kind of stuff that I found can bother you. And in hindsight, again, I didn't know until I took the course with you or listened to the course as you were presenting. I think it was at Southwest Fire. But to see that now as a career person, how prevalent that is that people are very much career firefighters and volunteer firefighters are taking that human side into effect. I've seen people hold people's hands, like patients' hands. I'm like, that's cool. That's one thing I was super impressed and very excited to see going to the career side and seeing that progress over time. Is just like, yeah, these are people, man. That's a cool thing.
That actually is helping people too. And sometimes even more powerfully than doing a physical task.
You said it. And I don't know if you got this from somewhere else, but helping people the way they need to be helped. It's such a simple concept, but like it's cool to start seeing that practice.
I find that even how crews are talking to each other after difficult calls, we'll discuss a difficult call or check on each other. I don't know how it was when you started out, Scott, but I know some people talk to me now. It's like, oh, I remember when I started out, we wouldn't talk about a call. We'll just go back and just do whatever, start cleaning or have coffee. But now I find we'll talk about difficult calls. We'll check on each other. I had a couple people reach out just to make sure I was okay. So it's really nice to have that human connection, not only out in the community, but also between your crew and making sure that everyone's okay.
I think that's very common, being a new person, especially in the career side, but having like captains call you, at that last call, like, how did you feel? That's pretty neat. Just going back to that one call I was mentioning, it was just in hindsight, knowing that there's more you can do for people. There's so much you can do in those moments for people.
Yeah, you can comfort them the way you would comfort your loved one. Why can't you reach that same part of you and pull that, out of your heart and extend it? The fear before was very self-protective. I shouldn't expose myself to it. And the more I put a barrier up, the better this will be. There's more value in taking away that I was compassionate in that moment. If it does stick with me for a while, A, I can pull the good I did out of that. So that'll help me process it. And B, if there's other stuff about it that is difficult to process, then I have things around me to help me process it. Just do that and let that stuff off as it happens, as opposed to like letting it pile up and having to deal with it and not even knowing where the feelings you're feeling are coming from, because you can't link them back to anything because there's too many things too far back.
The gift has been just the awareness and knowledge of the mental health and the community and the crews and the getting along with people. How important that truly is in practice has been a huge gift. And that comes 100% from this podcast, 100% from you as well, is just learning as you go.
They've been good reminders for me. And I think that's one of the things with the 50 rules and the 25 rules too, to talk about those a little bit. The intent of it, it was never, we've got all this nailed down. Here's what we do every single day of our lives and our careers, how perfect we're approaching this. When you write it down and put it in words and make a list, it's something you hold yourself to and you can check back on it. Where am I meeting these? Where am I falling down? And not to be hypercritical on yourself, but as reminders. I said this in an intro. I've put it out there and it was a thought and a feeling inside of me. And now that I've said the words, it's something you can touch back on and realize you had that thought and that intent and hold yourself accountable to it and then just recorrect and try and do better next time. If you don't have those things that you can refer back to, remember either saying or writing down or giving a presentation on it. Every time you read something or say something, you're reminding yourself of what you should be doing. So it just sort of helps keep the rudder a bit straighter, I guess. I know I've said it before, but I owe you guys so much gratitude and I really do appreciate everything you've done. Like it does deeply mean a lot to me. Every month that this goes by and we're still doing it, I celebrate it.
The opportunities and even just the mentorship, the things behind the scene that people don't see, the relationships that we have amongst each other have been such a rewarding thing in my life. And the things I've learned from the podcast. I know personally, I've reached out to a couple of people who've been on the podcast, just thanking them for their stories, the impact that it has on me, but also like all the people that are listening. And we're so thankful for everyone who listens. And I'm thankful for you guys too, and just the friendships that we have.
The gifts that have been given to me from this far outweigh what I'll ever be able to give back. But I'm doing my best to give back than the fire service. If everyone has that kind of background goal to be like, you know what, I want to give back more than I've ever taken from this, we're going to be in a really good spot.
What's on your playlist that you're always looking for episodes to pop up from?
I mean, obviously, Weekly Scrap is up there. I'm a big hockey guy, so I like Spittin' Chicklets. That's a good one. Obviously, Joe Rogan. Oh, Sean Ryan Show. And then just like some odds and ends. Like I'll just pick up something that comes along the way. But yeah, those are generally my go-to ones for sure. Diary of a CEO. I don't know if you guys have heard that one.
That one's good, yeah.
Those ones with like the one-off guys. When you get the ones with like David Goggins or any of those, like, oh, obviously Jocko podcast. Can't forget that. I just like listed off like the top 5 podcasts
in the world.
The top playlist for Brad is all top 5 of the world. I love that.
That's it. Just go to like the top 5 and it's just all those ones.
Is Spittin' Chicklets one of the biggest podcasts in the world? I've never heard of it before.
I think that's like the prime hockey podcast.
That's a great name for a hockey podcast. That's amazing.
Oh,
Rich Roll is really good as well.
Rich Roll, yes, amazing.
I feel like I'm not contributing. I was never a podcast guy and still kind of not, but the firefighting ones have been really good for me is the ones basically you've introduced me to. The Weekly Scrap is a good one for tactics and just hearing like the big names in the industry and kind of what they're doing and what they believe. And then the Grabs one is a really unique one that I don't think is as widely known. But when you kind of introduce some people to it and they're just like, oh man, I can't believe you've been hiding that from me. That's unreal.
And if you're not a listen to a 4-hour podcast kind of person, they're anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. So they're super accessible.
Yes.
The Journeyman Firefighter podcast is a real good one. And The Pipe Man, that's another one. If you're into engine work, that's a really great one too.
There's another one that you and I were talking about a bit, Scotty, was Modern Wisdom. That's a new one. It's kind of hit or miss.
No, I like that one.
There's been a lot of good ones lately. You recognize it. Yeah, it's good.
And the Mission Critical Teams Institute, MCTI, the Teamcast. That one I wish was way more popular than it is. It's just super cool.
You ever had people not know who you are, that you run a podcast, and then they start rhyming off their favorite podcasts and multiple calls comes up in there?
I don't think that's happened, but I have been at SFA and been talking and they recognize my voice. Sometimes in a group, it'll be mentioned that we do this and then they'll recognize, like, I thought I knew your voice. So that's been a weird thing that's happened a couple times, but I don't know if I've heard people rhyme them off and they've listed that as one of them.
Have you ever been approached for an audiobook reading yet?
No, not yet.
How many times do I ask you to do that, Scotty? How many times?
You have asked me to do that. You said we should start and you would edit them. But let's put it out there. Like if anybody wants to have their book read and want me to read it and they want Brad to edit it, 100% hit us up. Well, let's wrap this up then. Maybe you guys can list a number of episodes that stand out to you as favorites.
Listening to Amber's, I think, was a big thing for me. How she's kind of navigated it and the fitness and being a female. It's nice to kind of hear another female's perspective getting into firefighting. And I also worked with her for a bit to get all the fitness testing done for firefighting. So it was kind of good to hear her background and I was able to relate to her. So I knew working with her, it would be seamless. And I passed all my stuff, which was really helpful. And also with Matt too, Matt Johnston. I remember this was before I got hired. I was toying with, do I go back to school? Like I'm really interested in the mental health side of being a first responder. So I reached out to him just for some advice. So he kind of guided me. We had a conversation over the phone actually, just about his background and how he got into firefighting, but also what his background is with the mental health stuff and what he's kind of done for that. So that had a huge impact. And he just told me to keep going for fire and to really focus on that. And it really encouraged me to kind of like dial it in because I knew that if I got in firefighting, and obviously that's my main goal, I could also pursue other outlets down the road. So it was really encouraging to kind of hear that there is a huge need also for the mental health side stuff and that there's other people working on it who are really passionate. So it was really nice to talk to Amber on the phone too. Like they took time out of their day just to mentor me, guide me. I didn't know them before that. So it was nice to be able to reach out to them and be like, hey, like I'm kind of confused. This is what I want to do. And they really helped me into firefighting full time. And being a mentor has been a huge reward out of being part of the podcast team.
This one's hard because there's a few in the hopper right now that I think might make their way up there. But
okay, so let's start there. Which ones are you looking forward to that are in the queue to edit?
One that I'm editing right now, Andy Starnes. I think people are going to love that. Or by the time this comes out, you will have loved it. But there's obviously that one. Rob Ramirez, I'm looking forward to. But for me, like the top three that kind of stick out, I'd say are obviously Jeff Clayton's number one, Bobby Eckert, and I'd say Stephanie White. I think her episode was really great as well. But there's so many good ones like Manny. He's been on a couple of times. They're great. Kevin's episode, Kevin Caverton. I love that one. And obviously Kyle Romagus. I mean, you can keep going. I'd say those probably stick out the most. It's just, I found those three, like they were very driven. That idea of like, who cares what people are saying? Just do what you think is right or do what is right and just keep going. And I just love that. Especially like Jeff Clayton and Bobby Eckert. That's the Canadian version and the American version, in my opinion. And then Stephanie was great as well. It's great to edit them because as you go through, like you just keep going and going and going. You're like, oh my God, I just want to keep listening. It's like reading a good book. I wish people could see it too. Like I don't tell too many people like what's coming up because I like to keep that a surprise, I guess. But there's so many good names in the hopper. And after this episode, how many good ones are to come? It's great. I can't wait. So
I'm scrolling through the list here too. And this is such a cop-out answer. They're all good. It's true. They are all good. And I find that as I'm scrolling through, I find that I see the name and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that story. That was a really cool one. Kyle Romagus, that episode, I want to be big and strong like that dude. Jesse Bond and Gord Roche. It's cool when you meet people face to face. Like I did some Southwest Fire Academy stuff back in the day, and they actually came out to the volunteer side for our water rescue stuff. Great dudes. And then to hear their stories, like you say, when you get to know people one-on-one and then you hear like, oh, I didn't know that about them. That's cool. And like what they're doing is awesome. The most impactful one, I believe, for me still, I know it's Wendy Lund. Wendy's great too. I love Wendy.
Yeah, she's an amazing human being. Shout out to Wendy.
She is a blessing. Learn about salutogenics. That's a big word.
Salutogenesis, yeah.
Yes. But the biggest one, like I said, for me, and I don't even kid you when I say this, is I'll listen to it once a month, is the Aaron Fields episode, just for like the life stuff. One of the biggest impact kind of going for me right now is his discussion about family and what it means to him. And I'll just paraphrase as best I possibly can. Something I'm kind of dealing with right now too is family is work. It's who you put the work in with. Bloodline doesn't carry you super far. You're related to someone doesn't necessarily mean they're your family. Just a group of 4 people. Oh, what a good segue. You guys, like the time we're putting in, I'm so grateful we have this. I would consider you guys family, and I'm closer to you guys than I am some of my distant blood relatives. I know stuff about you guys. You know stuff about me. We've put the work in together, and I find I'll go back and listen to that episode. Was that number 13 or something? Just to hear that stuff too. And just you get some people who think very differently. It's super encouraging to hear that.
Yeah, it's interesting for me to scroll back to because I've also had the interactions with them leading up to the episode and then us talking before we start recording and then after we record and then the sort of the back and forth with leading up to releasing the episode and then, and then we're connected. So we have conversations beyond that. So I have this whole arc of the relationship with each person sort of beyond just the 2 hours or the hour that people hear. Wendy's is way, way up there and I owe her more than I can ever say. The Change Up episode 50 was obviously very special for Caroline and Dave to want to sit down and record with me. And then the one with my dad, to have that as kind of a gift and a keepsake. I think, Brad, you've sort of referred to this too, of seeing each one as sort of a keepsake, right? As a gift to the guest. For maybe people that don't know, is that the guest is always in control of the episode. So they know coming into it that it's edited, that we can have a wide open conversation. Again, super kudos to Corley for doing it live because it's a lot harder to do that and do it well. But I think a lot of people would be reluctant to come on and do a podcast if they had to be worried about what if I say this name or I refer to this department or I say something that might be off-putting. So they hold back and they're not necessarily as like wide open as they could be. So we always approach it as like, listen, you're in control. You're going to get first listen. Let's just wide open, put everything on the table. We'll edit it back to what you're happy with. And then if there's things you want to amend or make edits with, which doesn't happen that often, they give timestamps and they want to cut some things out. That doesn't really happen that often. I've had it happen a couple times and then they get the first listen, they get the edits made, they're 100% like, I love this, I'm so excited for it, and then it gets released, right? So we know that they're really, really happy with it. I guess those ones would really stand out. Mark Arnold really stands out as a special conversation just around the mental health aspect of things. Jay Bonifields was an awesome one. Scott Chisholm, he really brought just vulnerability, right? And Bobby Eckert was like super vulnerable. There's your firefighter too, right? And even Brass was this way too. They came across as super vulnerable and just laid it all out and like as a human being, and God love them for it. It's pretty special. Yeah, but Jenny House. See, I could go on and just keep naming names. Love Jenny.
Yeah, it's not fair for you to start rhyming it off because these are all your friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep going.
Start at 100 and work your way down just to see.
Yeah. And Kevin
got that.
Burks was really interesting too, right? That he came at it from a totally different perspective. Chris Torres, there's a guy that's like pitching for the FDNY baseball team. Like there's just so many people that have these unique experiences. And then we've had people outside of the fire service that are really trying to do great things for the fire service. Wendy being one of them. Jesse Coomer was another. Marie Bodine was another one, right? So there's people that aren't even in the service that really want to do great things to help the service. Yeah, and shout out to David Brooks, like him and I there's, and Manny, those are two of the guys that became really, really good friends, and we've never actually shaken hands or had a hug. So hopefully coming soon in our future that we can actually get together and see people face to face.
Who's your dream interviewee?
Oof, my dream interviewee.
It doesn't have to be fire service.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I know for sure.
What's that? You know who it's going to be? Probably I would say Jordan Peterson. Is that who you're going to? Yeah, for sure. It would be Jordan Peterson. It'd be hard not to fanboy out the whole time. But I still think there would be some unique things, even though some of the greats have already interviewed him. It's a synergy thing. It's a relationship thing. Even though people have been on other podcasts, you bring a new interviewer and an interviewee together, there's a new synergy. It's a new thing. So there's going to be something new that comes out of it. Yeah, that would be the dream, to express deep gratitude to him for everything he's brought forward to people and saved a lot of people's lives, that's for sure, as much as he gets wrongly sound bitten and typecast.
Well, you've put it out there, and I'm sure the team from Jordan Peterson's podcast can reach Scott Hewlett at multiple calls.
Seeing him, was it last year? I think it was last year I went and saw him. That was a really cool experience. What was really interesting about starting to listen to him is that I never would have thought that I would enjoy sitting and listen to someone talk about the books of the Bible and telling stories and pulling them apart. And I think he's even commented about how surprised he is that people want to listen to that. But the way that he approached it and talk about the mythology, and like you talk about, Brad, about the greater stories of things and how you can relate to things, that was what really drew me in. I'm like, wow, like for someone to make that interesting and to draw those lines so clearly and to offer those thoughts in a way that people can digest them, that is just incredible. As a speaker, as a teacher, as a lecturer, to be able to do that is just incredible. I think I've learned a lot from him, even though I'm rambling through all this. Like if I'm going to give a presentation, I've really tried to cut out the fat and really try to present things in a clearer way, the way that someone like him would. He'd be one of my informal mentors.
Got to try to hit him up.
Yeah, Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan, Jocko, all these big names, and then chatting with us. Yeah. You know what? He's from what we can tell, right? He's just someone that's so big, but from what I've heard, when he does encounter people, it's such a volume of people that would want to have his time. And I think he would want to give his time to every single person that he possibly could. And you see the emotion he brings forward to his interactions. I think he would love to spend 3 hours with every person on this planet, but you just can't do it. So how do you do that when you become that big? Maybe that's why podcasts have become so popular. Here's our way to get to know somebody really well, people that we might not get a chance to talk to. Yeah, I'll put that out there, thanking all the guests that have come on and all the ones that may in the future, giving their time to sit and talk, because you don't necessarily have to be Jordan Peterson to have something really important to say. And I think, Haley, you touched on it too. We all have something we could offer to somebody. Someone's coming up a few steps behind us that we can offer something to and offer a hand up. And that's just as powerful sometimes as somebody famous. Good on us for doing that.
Can I make one small request for our outro? You know how you always have the piano outro because it's just like a soft, quiet exit. And depending on how the conversation goes, sometimes it's your opener. But the alarm opener, can you make that the closer? Because I feel like I want to run through a wall after this conversation. Every time I hear it, I just get so excited.
Awesome. Done. Brad, make it so.
Yeah, I'll make it happen.
All right. Love you guys. I'm glad we did this.
Thanks for everything you do, buddy.
Yeah, thank you.